The air conditioning hummed irritantly in the waiting room of the city hospital, a counterpoint to the echo of hurried footsteps and hushed conversations. It was a Monday morning, the kind that seemed to carry the weight of the world on the shoulders of those navigating the cold, impersonal corridors of public health care. Rows of blue plastic chairs, lined up like weary soldiers, held a silent multitude of hope and resignation. In the far corner, almost pressed against a wall where the paint peeled in small flakes, a man of about 60 sat clutching a worn manila folder. His hands, etched with prominent veins and small scars, trembled almost imperceptibly, not from fear, but from an exhaustion that transcended the physical. He wore a crisp white shirt, carefully ironed, and gray dress pants that, despite being worn, retained a sharp crease. On his feet were black leather shoes, polished with the meticulous care of someone who understood that presentation was a form of dignity. His name was Joseph Miller, and at that moment he represented the perfect epitome of the hard-working American who had dedicated 42 years of his life to the same job, only to discover that the Social Security Administration had denied his retirement application due to inconsistencies in documentation, a cruel euphemism for the bureaucracy that devours dreams and hopes. Beside him, on the cold hospital floor, rested a wooden cane, an inseparable companion since the workplace accident that cost him the full mobility of his right leg. Then she arrived. Camila Reyes, in her 30s, wore an impeccable navy blue suit that stood in stark contrast to the casual environment of the public hospital. Her high heels echoed authoritatively on the cold floor, and the leather briefcase she carried under her arm suggested importance and urgency. She went directly to the reception desk, where a clerk chewed gum with evident disinterest. "I need an urgent appointment," Camila said, her voice laced with barely concealed impatience. "I have an important meeting at 2 o'clock, and I can't wait." The clerk, without looking up from the computer, responded with the monotonous tone of someone who repeats the same phrase hundreds of times a day. "Numbers were given out at 7. You have to wait in line like everyone else." Camila sighed deeply, her face revealing the frustration of someone accustomed to solving problems efficiently and quickly. She looked around the crowded room and, for the first time, truly saw the people there. Her eyes scanned the weary faces, the simple clothes, the expressions of resignation that seemed permanently etched on those countenances. That's when her gaze met Joseph's. There was something about the older worker that made her stop. Perhaps it was the way he held his documents, with the care of someone handling a treasure. Or perhaps it was the way he observed the movement around him, without judgment, only with the patience of someone who had learned that life doesn't always follow our schedules. Camila noticed the cane beside him, the polished shoes, the impeccably pressed shirt, signs of a dignity that refused to be broken by circumstance. For a moment, she felt a pang of discomfort. Here she was, impatient for an appointment she could easily afford at a private hospital, while beside her sat a man who had probably sacrificed much just to have the right to this wait. The reality of inequality, usually masked by the routine of her privileged life, manifested itself here in a raw and undeniable way. Camila moved to a chair nearby, feeling the weight of the contrast between her urgency and the infinite patience of those who had no other option. She watched as Joseph occasionally checked his watch, not with irritation, but with the resignation of someone who knows the system and its flaws. She noticed how he delicately adjusted his cane beside him, as if even that object were part of his careful presentation to the world. Time crawled by. The city hospital waiting room remained packed. People continued to wait, and Joseph sat in his chair, as still as a monument to patience. Camila began to feel restless, not just from the wait, but from the growing awareness that her presence there was, in a way, an intrusion. She had choices that this man didn't. She could leave at any moment and solve her problem another way, while he was completely dependent on this flawed and dehumanizing system. That's when the clerk finally called out, "Joseph Miller, room 3." The man slowly rose, leaning on his cane with calculated movements. Camila watched as he carefully organized the documents in his folder, checked to make sure he hadn't forgotten anything, and approached the counter with the same dignity he had waited with. There was something profoundly touching in the way he walked, not like someone defeated by the system, but like someone who maintained his humanity despite everything. At that moment, something shifted within Camila. She stood up abruptly, her decision made before her mind could fully process what she was about to do. She crossed the room with firm steps, her heels echoed with a determination that made several people look in her direction. "Excuse me," she said, addressing both Joseph and the clerk, "but I'd like to give up my appointment time to this gentleman." The clerk blinked, confused. "But ma'am, he's already been called, and you don't even have an appointment scheduled." Camila smiled, and for the first time since arriving, her expression seemed genuinely human. "Then I'd like to schedule an appointment for him, for today, now." An awkward silence filled the room. Joseph, who had already started to walk towards the examination room, stopped and slowly turned to face the young woman. His eyes, small and piercing, studied her for a moment, as if trying to decipher her intentions. "It's not necessary, young lady," he said, his voice filled with a gentleness that contrasted with the harshness of the environment. But Camila had made a decision that transcended logic or convenience. She approached the counter and, with the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems, said, "I want to speak to the manager, now." The clerk, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, mumbled something about "that's not how things work around here," but Camila's determined tone admitted no contradiction. Within minutes, a middle-aged man, wearing a white coat and carrying a clipboard, appeared at the counter. "What's the problem?" he asked, his voice revealing the weariness of someone who deals daily with complaints and complex situations. Camila took a deep breath and, with a calmness she didn't know she possessed, explained, "There's no problem. I'd simply like to pay for a private consultation for this gentleman within this institution with the doctor available most quickly." The manager frowned, clearly confused. "But, ma'am, we don't have that kind of procedure." "Then create one," Camila replied, pulling her credit card from her purse. "How much does a private consultation cost here? I'll pay." What happened in the next few minutes was a bureaucratic dance involving phones, consultations of regulations, and hushed conversations between employees. Meanwhile, Joseph remained standing, leaning on his cane, observing the situation with an expression that mixed surprise, embarrassment, and a profound gratitude he didn't know how to express. Finally, the manager returned with a solution. "We can fit you into Dr. Martinez's schedule. He sees private patients here in the afternoons. He can see you in 30 minutes. Camila smiled and extended her card. Perfect. It was then that Joseph approached her, his steps slow but determined. When he stopped a few inches away, Camila could see up close the marks that life had left on his face. Expression lines that spoke of smiles given even in difficult times. Eyes that had seen much, but that still held a gleam of hope. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice low but charged with emotion. Camila hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten," she said finally, "that dignity is priceless and that everyone deserves to be treated with respect." Joseph nodded slowly, and for the first time since arriving at the hospital, a genuine smile lit up his face. "Thank you, young lady, not for the appointment, but for seeing me." Those words hit Camila like a punch to the chest. "Seeing me?" she repeated, confused. "Yes," said Joseph, adjusting his cane. "Many people look at people like me and see only a problem, a delay, an obstacle. You saw me as a person." At that moment, Camila understood that it wasn't she who was doing Joseph a favor. It was he who was giving her an invaluable gift. the chance to reconnect with her own humanity. And perhaps that's what we all need to remember, that in an increasingly rushed and individualistic world, there are still opportunities to make a difference in someone's life, even with simple gestures. If you're following this story and it's touching your heart, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. Because stories like this, which remind us of the importance of empathy and compassion, need to be shared. We need to create a wave of kindness that inspires other people to act with more humanity in their daily lives. Dr. Martinez was an experienced man with graying hair and steady hands. When he examined Joseph, he did more than just check his symptoms. He listened with patience and genuine interest to the story of a man who had dedicated decades to hard work. He discovered that Joseph's problem wasn't just physical, but also emotional. The denial of his retirement had shaken his self-esteem, making him question whether a lifetime of honest work had been worthwhile. "Mr. Miller," the doctor said, closing the examination file, "physically, you're doing much better than men your age. But I need you to understand something. A person's worth isn't measured by the retirement benefits they receive or don't receive. Your dignity is here," he pointed to the patient's chest, "and no one can take that away from you." When Joseph left the office, he found Camilla waiting in the room, casually flipping through a magazine. She stood up as soon as she saw him. "How did it go?" she asked, genuinely interested. "Good," Joseph replied, and there was a lightness in his voice that hadn't been there before. "Very good, actually." They walked together to the hospital exit, their steps synchronized, she naturally slowing her pace to match his. In the parking lot, Joseph stopped and turned to her. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "What made you do that? Really?" Camilla thought for a moment, searching for an answer that did justice to the complexity of what she had felt. "I think it was the way you waited," she finally said. "There was so much dignity in your patience, so much strength in your serenity. It made me realize I'd lost something important in my constant rush." "And what was that?" "The ability to see people, really see them." Joseph smiled again, that smile that completely transformed his face. "You know, young lady, I've worked for over 40 years, and I've learned that the most important work isn't what we do to earn money. It's what we do to maintain our humanity." "And how do we maintain our humanity, Mr. Miller?" "By treating every person we meet as if they were important, because they are." They said goodbye there in the sunny hospital parking lot, but both knew that this encounter had changed something fundamental in their lives. Camilla returned to her office, but for the rest of the day, she found herself thinking about the lesson she had learned. That afternoon, she called her secretary and canceled 2 meetings. Instead, she went to visit her mother, who had been complaining of loneliness, but whom Camilla always didn't have time to see. Joseph, in turn, went home with a sense of renewal he hadn't felt in months. He told his wife Mary about what had happened, and she cried, not out of sadness, but out of gratitude to know that people like Camilla still existed in the world. In the following weeks, something interesting happened. Camilla began to notice things that had previously gone unnoticed. The building's doorman, who always greeted her cheerfully, but whom she had never really seen. The cleaning lady in the office, who worked silently while everyone ignored her. The waiter at the restaurant where she had lunch, who always treated her courteously, but whom she had never considered as a person with a story of his own. Slowly, she began to establish genuine connections with these people. She discovered that the doorman was a frustrated poet who wrote verses during his breaks. That the cleaning lady supported 3 children alone and studied accounting in the early mornings. That the waiter was a medical student working to pay for his studies. Each discovery was a revelation, each conversation an opportunity for growth. Camilla began to understand that she had lived in a bubble, interacting only with people in her social and professional circle, ignoring the human richness that surrounded her daily. Joseph, in turn, decided not to give up the fight for his retirement benefits. But now he approached the process differently.
no longer as a personal battle against an unjust system, but as an opportunity to dignify all the workers who were going through the same situation. He began attending union meetings, advising other workers about their rights, transforming his experience into a tool for mutual aid.
Months later, Camila was walking downtown when she saw a small crowd gathered in front of the Social Security Administration building. Curious, she approached and discovered that it was a peaceful protest of retirees claiming their rights. In the center of the group, speaking passionately but without aggression, was Joseph. She approached, and when he saw her, his face lit up. After his speech, he turned to her. "It's good to see you, Camila," he said, using the same gentle tone as always. "Mr. Miller, what's all this about?" "We're fighting for our rights," he replied, "but in a civilized way. We want to show that we are worthy citizens, not beggars." Camila looked around and saw that the protest had a different organization from others she had witnessed. There were no shouts, no aggression, just worthy people claiming what was rightfully theirs. "Can I help in some way?" she asked. Joseph smiled. "You can, but not in the way you're thinking." "What do you mean?" "You've already helped me more than you can imagine. That day at the hospital taught me that I wasn't alone, that there are still people who care. That gave me the strength to keep fighting, but mainly to help others fight too." Camila looked around again and realized that there was something special about that group. Despite the difficulties, the denials, the bureaucratic obstacles, there was hope in the faces of those people. There was collective dignity, mutual solidarity. "You know what I discovered," Joseph continued, "that when we treat people with respect, they respond in the same way. That when we recognize the dignity of others, our own dignity is strengthened." At that moment, Camila understood that what had happened between her and Joseph had not been just an isolated act of kindness. It had been the beginning of a transformation that had spread in concentric circles, affecting not only their own lives, but the lives of all those who had been touched by their new perspective. She began attending the group's meetings, not as a lawyer or as an influential person, but as a citizen who had learned to value human dignity. She used her legal knowledge to advise retirees about their rights, but always in a horizontal way, never condescending. A year later, Joseph finally received his Social Security benefits. Not only his, but also those of dozens of other hardworking Americans who had benefited from the organization he helped create. When Camila heard the news, she felt a joy she couldn't fully explain. They met to celebrate at a small downtown cafe. Joseph arrived without his cane. Medical treatment and physical therapy had significantly improved his mobility. Camila noticed he looked younger, more vigorous. There was a sparkle in his eyes that she hadn't seen during their first meeting. "Congratulations, Mr. Miller," she said, genuinely happy. "Thank you, Camila. But you know what's more important than the Social Security check?" "What?" "Having learned that dignity doesn't come from outside. It comes from within. And when we share it, it multiplies." They talked for hours at that cafe, sharing stories, reflections, dreams. Camila talked about the changes in her life, about how she had learned to appreciate the small, everyday human interactions. Joseph talked about the group of retirees, about how they had created a support network that went far beyond Social Security issues. "We know we turned our pain into strength," he said, "and our strength into a tool to help others." When they said goodbye that day, they both knew they had built something that transcended the circumstance that had united them. They had discovered that true wealth isn't in what we possess, but in how we relate to the people around us. Camila went home with a sense of completeness she hadn't felt in a long time. She had found a purpose that went beyond her professional career, beyond her personal goals. She had discovered that the deepest happiness comes from the ability to make a difference in the lives of other people. Joseph, in turn, continued his work of organization and mutual aid. But now he did it with a different perspective. No longer as someone who had been a victim of an unfair system, but as someone who had transformed his experience into a tool for social transformation. Years later, looking back, Camila identified that day at the city hospital as a turning point in her life, not only because of the action she had taken, but because of the lesson she had learned. She had understood that human dignity isn't a luxury or a courtesy, but a fundamental necessity for building a more just and humane society. And Joseph, even in retirement, remained active in the community, always willing to help other workers, always preaching that true strength lies in unity and mutual respect. He had become a reference point, not only for retirees, but for all those who believed it was possible to transform the world through small gestures of humanity. What began as a chance encounter in a city hospital waiting room had become a story of mutual transformation, personal growth, and social impact. It had proven that when we recognize the dignity of others, we create a virtuous cycle that expands and touches other lives, other realities, other possibilities. Because, in the end, we are all Joseph or Camila at different times in our lives. We've all been invisible at some point, and we've all had the opportunity to see and appreciate someone who was being ignored. The difference lies in the choice we make in those crucial moments. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of this story, that human dignity isn't something that some possess and others don't. It's something we all carry within us, waiting only to be recognized, valued, and shared. When we make that choice, we transform not only the life of the other, but primarily our own lives, discovering that true wealth lies in the ability to see and celebrate the humanity that surrounds us daily.